On the day I buried my husband, my daughter showed up with a folder of documents and a lawyer. I still had red eyes from crying. I still felt the weight of the casket on my shoulders. I still heard in my head the last words Michael whispered to me before he closed his eyes forever. And she, my Jessica, the girl I carried for 9 months, the baby I nursed until my breasts ached, the teenager I worked double shifts for so she could go to the best private school, was standing in front of me with a cold expression I had never seen before. She didn't even ask how I was feeling. She didn't even hug me. She just said, with a voice that sounded like a stranger's, "Mom, we need to talk about the inheritance. We need to get this settled now." It was the day of the funeral. The house still smelled of wilting flowers and stale coffee. The neighbors had just left, leaving unwashed dishes in the kitchen, and their whispered condolences that I already couldn't remember. I was sitting on the living room sofa, that same sofa where Michael and I had spent 43 years watching old movies on Sundays, arguing over bills, planning vacations we sometimes never got to take. My hands were shaking, not from fear but from exhaustion. I had spent the last 6 months taking care of Michael as the cancer slowly consumed him. I had cleaned his body when he could no longer do it himself. I had held his hand during the nights when the pain was so strong he cried out. I had sold jewelry. I had taken out loans. I had begged doctors to try one more treatment, just one more. And now, barely 12 hours after I had watched him be lowered into the earth, my daughter was in front of me with papers that needed my signature. Jessica had always been hard to read. Since she was little, she was reserved, calculating, observant. While other children played without thinking, she studied people as if they were equations to solve. Michael used to say she was just smart, that her coldness was just misunderstood shyness. I wanted to believe him. I needed to believe him. But in that moment, seeing her eyes, empty of any emotion, I realized that maybe I'd never really known her at all. "Mom," she insisted, her voice a little louder, a little more impatient. "I need you to understand that this can't wait. Dad left properties, bank accounts, investments. Everything is in your name now. But legally, I'm entitled to my share. The $3 million. And this house. $3 million. The figure left her mouth as naturally as if she were asking for money for a cab. $3 million that Michael and I had saved, penny by penny, over an entire lifetime. Money that came from early mornings at work, from cheap meals, from second-hand clothes, from canceled vacations. Every dollar of that $3 million had sweat and tears and sacrifice behind it. And she wanted it. Now. On the day of her father's funeral, Mark, her husband, stood behind her, his hands in his pockets, and a neutral expression that tried to look respectful but didn't fool anyone. He had always been like that, quiet, polite on the surface, but with a gaze that calculated, that measured, that waited for the right moment. Jessica had met him in college, and from the first day she brought him home, I got a weird feeling in my stomach, a sensation I couldn't explain. Michael told me I was just being an overprotective mother. Maybe he was right. Or maybe not. The lawyer, a man in his 50s with a gray suit and a leather briefcase, cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Mrs. Anderson, I'm very sorry for your loss. I understand this is a difficult time, but your daughter is correct that these legal matters should be resolved quickly to avoid future complications with the IRS and the banks. Complications. As if my future mattered. As if I had any future without Michael." I looked at Jessica, right in the eyes. I searched for something, anything, a flicker of the little girl who used to hug me during nightmares, of the teenager who cried on my shoulder when her first boyfriend broke up with her, of the woman who was supposed to love me. But I found nothing. Only impatience, only calculation, only greed disguised as practicality. "Jessica," I said finally, my voice hoarse from crying, barely leaving my throat. "Your father died less than a day ago." "I know, Mom. That's why we need to act fast. These things take time. The banks, the lawyers, the taxes. If we wait too long, we're going to lose money in penalties." Losing money. That was what she was worried about. Not my pain. Not her own pain, if she even felt any. Just the money. The lawyer opened his briefcase and took out a stack of documents. "Mrs. Anderson, I have the papers for your husband's will here. As you can see, He left everything in your name, which is completely normal. However, your daughter has a legal right to claim her portion of the inheritance. We're talking about approximately $3 million in cash, investments, and properties, in addition to this house, which is valued at another $500,000. $500,000. The house where I raised my daughter. The house where Michael and I painted every wall, fixed every leaky faucet, planted every tree in the yard. The house where we made love for the first time after we were married. The house where he died, in our bed, holding my hand. And she wanted it. "Mom," Jessica said, her tone softer now, more manipulative. "I know this is hard. I really do. But you have to think clearly. This house is too big for you alone. You're going to need help. You're going to need to be looked after. Mark and I have been talking, and we think the best thing is for you to sell the house, divide the inheritance as it should be, and come live with us. We can take care of you. We can be together as a family." As a family. What an empty word coming from her. I didn't say anything. I couldn't. I felt as if someone had sucked the air out of my lungs. I felt like I was sinking in cold, dark, bottomless water. I felt as if the child I had raised had died, and in her place was this stranger who only saw dollar signs where love should be. The lawyer put the papers on the coffee table. "If you sign here, Mrs. Anderson, we can begin the transfer process immediately. It's just a legal formality. Your daughter will receive her share. You will keep yours, and everything will be settled without complications." Without complications. As if ripping my heart out of my chest was something simple, Jessica sat next to me, too close, invading the space Michael used to fill. "Mom, be reasonable. This is what's best for everyone. Dad would have wanted us to get this settled fast, without any drama. You know how he was, practical, direct. How dare she talk about her father like that? How dare she use his memory to justify this betrayal? Michael wasn't practical when it came to family. Michael was the man who worked 3 jobs to pay for Jessica's college. Michael was the man who sold his car to buy her first one. Michael was the man who carried her in his arms until she was 12 years old because she said her feet hurt. And she hadn't even cried at his funeral. I looked at the papers on the table. Small print. Large numbers. Waiting signatures. I looked at Jessica, with her expensive blouse and her perfect makeup and her fresh manicure. I looked at Mark, still standing there like a silent guard. I looked at the lawyer, uncomfortable but professional, just doing his job. And then I looked at the photograph of Michael and me at our wedding, hanging on the wall across from me. We were so young, so full of hope, so in love. "I need time," I said finally. "I can't do this right now. I can't even think right now." Jessica sighed, frustrated. "Mom, there's no time. The banks need—" "No," I interrupted her, my voice firmer than it had been in months. "I need time. Your father just died. Give me a few days to just breathe." The lawyer nodded, gathering his papers. "Of course, Mrs. Anderson. This can wait a few days. But not too long. All right? There are legal deadlines to meet." They left, finally, the 3 of them. Jessica gave me a cold kiss on the cheek. Mark mumbled something about calling me tomorrow. The lawyer left his card on the table. And I was left alone in that huge house, surrounded by the smell of dead flowers and the heaviest silence I had ever felt. I realized something in that moment, something that terrified me and liberated me at the same time. I didn't know my own daughter, and she definitely didn't know me. I met Michael when I was 23 years old. I was working as a secretary at a small accounting firm downtown, and he was the technician who came to repair the copy machines when they jammed. The first time I saw him, he was wearing grease-stained coveralls and a smile that lit up the whole office. He wasn't handsome in the traditional sense, but he had something, a warmth, an honesty in his eyes that made you feel safe. I fell in love with him in 3 weeks. We got married 6 months later. My mother, Eleanor, wasn't completely convinced at first. She wanted me to marry someone with more education, more money, a more visible future. But when she saw how Michael looked at me, how he treated me, how he worked tirelessly to build something for us, she finally gave me her blessing. And over the years, Michael became the son she never had. We had nothing when we started. We lived in a one-room apartment where the kitchen, dining room, and living room were all the same space. Michael worked repairing machines during the day and studied to be an electrician at night. I was still at the accounting firm, managing other people's numbers while we could barely keep our own in order. But we were happy. Incredibly happy. We ate macaroni and cheese almost every day, but we did it together, laughing, planning our future. On Sundays, we walked through the park because we didn't have money for the movies. On our anniversary, Michael would buy me a single rose from a street vendor, and I would make him his favorite meal. We didn't need anything more. Jessica arrived 3 years after our wedding. I was 26 and terrified. I knew nothing about being a mother. My own childhood had been difficult. My father died when I was little, and Eleanor had to raise me and my 2 brothers alone. But Michael held my hand through the whole pregnancy, through the delivery, through those first sleepless nights where Jessica cried non-stop. She was a beautiful baby. She had Michael's eyes and my nose. Her hair was dark and full from the start. When I held her for the first time, I felt a love so intense it made my chest ache. I thought, I would give my life for this child. I would do anything for her. And I did. For the next 40 years. I did. Michael opened his own repair shop when Jessica was 2. It was a small place, barely bigger than our apartment, but it was ours. He worked from 6 in the morning until 10 at night, 6 days a week. I left my job to take care of Jessica, but I also handled the shop's bookkeeping, answered the phone, and scheduled the appointments. We were a team. Money was still tight, but no longer desperately tight. We could pay the rent on time. We could buy new clothes for Jessica each season. We could save a little each month, even if it was only $20 or $30. I remember the day Michael came home with an envelope full of cash. "Caroline," he said, almost breathless, his eyes shining with excitement. "I got it. I got the contract with the factory. They're bringing me all their machines for maintenance." It was the contract we had been waiting for years, the one that would change everything, and it did. In the next 10 years, Michael's business grew. He hired employees, he opened a second shop. He started repairing not just office machines, but computers, printers, industrial equipment. I was still handling the finances, and every month I watched the numbers grow. We bought our first house when Jessica was 12. It wasn't fancy, but it had 3 bedrooms, a small yard, and it was ours. Jessica grew up surrounded by everything Michael and I never had. Piano lessons, brand-name clothes, vacations at the beach every summer, the best private school in the city. We didn't spoil her, or at least we didn't think we did. We taught her the value of work. We showed her where we came from. We told her stories of our hard days so she would appreciate what she had. But looking back now, I wonder if she ever really listened. She was a quiet child, not like other kids who ran and screamed and made messes. Jessica was orderly, studious, obedient. She got excellent grades. She never got into trouble. The teachers adored her. The neighbors remarked on what a polite child, what a perfect daughter. But there was something I felt, but couldn't name. A distance, as if there was an invisible pane of glass between her and the rest of the world. Even with me, even with Michael. When she was 15, I found her counting money in her room. It was almost $300 in small bills. I asked her where she had gotten so much money. She told me she had been saving her allowance for months, but I managed the household accounts. I knew exactly how much we gave her each week. The numbers didn't add up. I confronted Michael about it that night. He laughed. "Caroline, she's just a kid being responsible with her money. You should be proud." But I wasn't proud. I was uneasy. I never found out where she got that extra money. And eventually, I let it go. Maybe Michael was right. Maybe I was just being paranoid. Jessica went to college to study business administration. She was brilliant. She graduated with honors. She got a job at a major consulting firm right after graduation. Michael and I were so proud we could burst. She met Mark at that firm. He was an accountant, 5 years older than her, with ambition, but without the charisma to get far on his own. I saw how he latched onto Jessica from the very beginning, how he followed her, how he watched her with those calculating eyes. I didn't like him. I told Michael. He reassured me. "Caroline, our daughter is an adult. She can make her own decisions. Mark seems like a good guy. He has a stable job. He treats her well. Did he treat her well? I suppose so, in the technical sense. I never saw her with bruises. I never heard screaming. But there was something in the way he looked at her that unsettled me, as if she were an asset, an investment. They got married when Jessica was 28. It was a beautiful, expensive wedding. Michael and I paid for everything, as was expected. Mark had no close family. His parents had died years before. So it was just us and Jessica's friends. She looked radiant in her white dress. I cried through the whole ceremony, though I wasn't entirely sure if they were tears of joy or something else. After the wedding, they started to distance themselves. At first, it was weekly visits that became bi-weekly, then monthly, then only on major holidays. Jessica always had excuses. Too much work. Big projects. Business trips. Michael accepted it. She's building her career, he'd say. It's natural for her to be busy. But I knew it was more than that. I could feel it every time they came to visit. The way Mark would size up our house with his eyes. The way Jessica would make comments about how big it was, about how much work it must be to maintain, about how we were getting too old for so much space. Casual comments. Innocent on the surface, but loaded with intention. My mother, Eleanor, was the one who kept me sane during those years. She lived in a small apartment 20 minutes from our house, and we visited constantly. We had coffee together every Thursday afternoon. She listened to me when I needed to vent about Jessica, about my worries, about that persistent feeling that something wasn't right. "Caroline," she'd say, holding my hand with her wrinkled but strong fingers. "Children aren't always what we expect, but they're still our children. You have to trust that you raised her right." But did we raise her right? Or did we raise her to think money was the most important thing? That material success was the only measure of value? Michael and I never talked about money in front of her when she was a child. We never flaunted our financial growth. We lived comfortably, yes, but humbly. We donated to charities. We helped neighbors who were struggling. We taught Jessica the value of giving, not just receiving. So what went wrong? When Michael turned 65, he decided to retire. The business was at its peak, but he was tired. 40 years of hard work had taken a toll on his body. His hands, once quick and precise, now had a slight tremor. His back ached constantly. The doctors told him he needed to rest. He sold the shops for a generous sum. Combined with our life savings and the investments we had wisely made over the years, we ended up with almost $3 million. It was a fortune to us, more money than we ever imagined having. Jessica found out, of course. I don't know how, because we didn't go around telling anyone. But she knew, and her visits, which had become so sporadic, suddenly increased in frequency. "Mom, Dad, how exciting about Dad's retirement," she said on one of those visits, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You must be thinking about what to do with all that money. Have you considered investments?" Mark has excellent contacts in investment funds. Michael thanked her but declined. "We have our investments handled, honey. We're fine." Jessica's smile tightened, just slightly, but she insisted, and she kept insisting on subsequent visits. The cancer came 2 years after Michael's retirement. Pancreatic cancer. Stage 4. The doctors told us he had, with luck, 6 months to live. Maybe a year with aggressive treatment. Michael fought. God, how he fought. Chemotherapy, radiation, experimental treatments. I sold some of our investments to pay for what the insurance wouldn't cover. I didn't care about the money. I just wanted more time with him. I just wanted a miracle. Jessica came to the hospital once during the first 3 months. A single time. She stayed for 20 minutes. She said she had an important meeting. And she left. Mark didn't even come into the room. He stayed in the parking garage, supposedly making work calls. My mother, Eleanor, at 87 years old, came every day. She would sit by Michael's bed, hold his hand, and tell him stories from when he and I were young. Michael would laugh, even though laughing hurt. "Mama Eleanor," he'd say, "you really know how to brighten an old sick man's day." Michael lasted 8 months. 8 months of pain, of hope, of fear, of love so intense that every moment felt eternal and fleeting at the same time. He died in our bed, at home, as he wanted. I was holding his hand. His last words were, "Caroline, you were the best part of my life." And then he was gone. And the next day, Jessica appeared with a lawyer and a folder full of papers, demanding $3 million and the house where her father had just died. The years before Michael got sick were the quietest of our life together. After 40 years of constant work, we could finally breathe. We traveled to places we had always dreamed of but never been able to afford. We went to Italy, to the village where Michael's grandmother was born. We walked the cobblestone streets holding hands like teenagers. We ate in little restaurants where no one knew us and no one judged us. We were just Caroline and Michael, two people in love, enjoying the time we had left. We bought a new car, something Michael had always wanted but never allowed himself. A comfortable sedan, nothing flashy, but with leather seats and a decent sound system. On Sundays, we would just go for a drive with no destination, just for the pleasure of being together, listening to the oldies station that reminded us of our youth. The house, our house, we had remodeled it little by little over those years. Michael fixed up the yard, planted the roses I'd always wanted. We painted the walls, warm colors. We replaced the old furniture with more comfortable pieces. It wasn't a mansion, but it was perfect for us. Every corner had a story. Every room held memories. Jessica and Mark came to dinner occasionally. Maybe once every 2 months, sometimes 3. Always with last-minute notice, as if they were doing us a favor by showing up. I would cook his favorite dishes, Michael would set the table with care, and they would arrive with polite smiles and superficial conversation. Mark always looked at everything with too much attention. The new television, the updated appliances, the kitchen improvements. "This remodel must have cost a fortune," he commented once, trying to sound casual but with his eyes calculating invisible numbers. Michael laughed. "Not as much as you'd think. I did most of the work myself. You save a lot when you know how to use your hands." But Mark didn't seem convinced. He kept looking, evaluating, adding it all up. Jessica was more subtle. "Mom, this house is so big for just the two of you, don't you think? You must spend a fortune on maintenance, on utilities, on taxes." I always gave the same answer. "We're comfortable, honey. This is our home. We raised you here. All our memories are here." She would smile, but it was an empty smile. "Yeah, of course. I'm just saying, at your age, maybe something smaller would be more practical." At our age, as if being in our 60s automatically made us incapable of deciding where to live. My mother Eleanor came by much more often than Jessica. At least 3 times a week, we'd have tea in the backyard, share neighborhood gossip. She'd help me make preserves like we did when I was a girl. Michael adored her. "Mama Eleanor," he'd say, "you look younger every day. What's your secret?" Not having ungrateful children to sour my existence, she'd reply, and the 3 of us would laugh. But I knew she was talking about Jessica. My mother was never one to hide her opinions. "Caroline," she told me one afternoon while we were peeling vegetables in the kitchen, "that girl of yours isn't normal. A daughter who visits her parents every 3 months when she lives only half an hour away. That's not normal. Mom, she has her own life. Her job. Her marriage." Eleanor put the knife down on the cutting board with more force than necessary. "Nonsense. I worked my whole life and I never stopped visiting you. She's got something else on her mind besides love for her family, believe me." I didn't want to believe her. I wanted to think my mother was being too harsh, too traditional in her expectations. But deep down, I felt it too. That distance wasn't just physical. It was emotional. It was intentional. When Michael sold the shops, everything changed. Suddenly, Jessica had time to visit us. Suddenly, she was concerned about our well-being, our finances, our future. "Mom, Dad, you need a good financial advisor. The money you have could grow so much more if you invest it correctly." Michael was stubborn. "Honey, we've managed our money for 40 years. I think we know what we're doing." "But things are different now, Dad. You have a significant amount. You can't just leave it in savings accounts, losing value to inflation." Mark always nodded in the background, supporting every word Jessica said with his silent but constant presence. One day, they brought a financial advisor to the house. Without warning, without asking permission, he just showed up with them. "Dad, Mom, this is Alfred. He's an expert in wealth management for retirees. We just wanted you to hear his ideas." Michael got angry. It was one of the few times I saw him truly upset with Jessica. "This is inappropriate," he said, his voice firm but controlled. "We don't appreciate you bringing strangers into our home without consulting us. Our finances are private." Jessica seemed genuinely surprised by his reaction. "We were just trying to help, Dad." "We don't need that kind of help." They left shortly after, and for weeks, we heard nothing from them. I thought maybe they had gotten the message, that they would finally respect our boundaries. But I was wrong. They came back eventually, with soft apologies and careful conversations that avoided the topic of money. For a while, things seemed to go back to normal, or at least our version of normal. Occasional dinners, brief phone calls, birthday cards. Michael and I enjoyed our quiet days. We ate breakfast together every morning, reading the newspaper and discussing the news. We'd take walks in the park in the evenings. We watched old movies on Saturday nights. We made love slowly, without rushing, savoring every moment of intimacy we had built over decades. We were happy, deeply, simply happy. And then came the diagnosis. Pancreatic cancer. The doctor's words echoed in the room like funeral bells. Stage 4, aggressive. Limited options. Michael took my hand as the doctor spoke. I could barely breathe. I felt as if the floor was opening up beneath my feet, as if everything we had built was collapsing in real time. "How long?" Michael asked, his voice calmer than it had any right to be. "With aggressive treatment? Maybe a year. Without treatment? A few months. 1 year. 12 months. 365 days. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough." I called Jessica that night. I needed my daughter. I needed her support, her presence, her love. "Jessica, your father is sick. It's serious. We need you to come." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "How bad is it?" "Cancer. Stage 4. Another pause. "Oh, wow. I'm sorry, Mom. I'll come visit soon. I promise. I'm in the middle of a big project at work right now, but I'll come soon." Soon turned out to be 2 weeks later. She arrived on a Saturday afternoon, alone, without Mark. She stayed for less than an hour. She sat uncomfortably in the living room while Michael slept on the sofa, exhausted from chemotherapy. I told her about the treatment, about how hard it was, about how much we needed him. She listened with a neutral expression, nodding occasionally. When Michael woke up briefly, she went over, kissed his forehead, and said, "Dad, you're going to be fine. You're strong." But there was no conviction in her words, no tears in her eyes. There was no fear or pain or palpable love. There was just nothing. She left shortly after, saying she had plans she couldn't cancel. "I'll call you during the week, Mom," she said from the door. She didn't call during the week, or the next, or the one after that. My mother, Eleanor, on the other hand, was there every day. Despite her age, her aching knees, her obvious fatigue, she came every morning. She brought food she knew Michael liked. She sat by his side for hours, telling him stories, making him laugh even when the pain was unbearable. "That woman is worth 100 Jessicas," Michael told me one night, his voice weak but clear. "You take after her, Caroline. You have her heart." "And Jessica?" I asked, though I was afraid of the answer. Michael closed his eyes. "I don't know who Jessica takes after." The months that followed Michael's diagnosis were the hardest of my life. Watching him deteriorate day by day was like watching a solid building crumble brick by brick. The strong man who had built a business from scratch, who had hauled refrigerators on his back, who had danced with me until dawn at our wedding, now struggled to get out of bed. The chemotherapy was brutal. He would throw up after every session, for hours. He lost the hair he was so proud of. He lost weight until his hands looked like dry branches. But he never lost that look in his eyes when he saw me enter the room. That look that said, "As long as you're here, I can stand anything." I slept by his side every night, even when the doctors suggested it might be more comfortable for me to sleep in another room. I didn't care about comfort. I cared about being there when he needed me, and he needed me constantly. To get him water, to help him to the bathroom, to hold his hand when the pain was so intense he clenched his jaw to keep from screaming. Jessica called occasionally. "How's Dad?" she would ask, in a voice that sounded like she was reading from a script. I told her the truth. That he was suffering. That he was getting worse. That we needed support. She would respond with empty platitudes. "He needs to stay positive. Miracles happen. I'm praying for him." But she never came. She always had excuses. An unavoidable work trip, a crucial presentation, an important client to attend to. As if her father's life, the last months of her father's life, were less important than a corporate meeting. Mark showed up once, alone, during the 5th month of Michael's illness. He arrived on a Tuesday afternoon without calling first. I was in the kitchen making a broth the doctor had recommended, something mild Michael could keep down. I heard the doorbell, and when I opened it, there he was, in his impeccable suit and his serious expression. "Caroline," he said without a proper greeting, "I need to talk to you about something important." I didn't like his tone. I didn't like that he came alone. I didn't like the folder he was carrying under his arm. "Mark, now is not a good time. Michael is resting, and I have to." "It's precisely about Michael," he interrupted. "It's about the future. About the family's finances." I felt something cold run down my spine. "What do you mean?" He walked past me without an invitation, heading straight for the living room as if he owned the place. He sat in the armchair where Michael used to watch television and opened the folder on the coffee table. "Look, Caroline, I know this is a difficult time, but that's exactly why we need to be practical. Michael's treatments are costing a fortune. The insurance doesn't cover everything. You're burning through your savings at an alarming rate. We are managing our finances perfectly fine," I replied, trying to stay calm. "Are you?" he asked, pulling papers from the folder. "According to my calculations, based on what Jessica has told me, you've spent almost $200,000 in the last 6 months. Between experimental treatments, imported medicines, and that private nurse you hire 3 times a week. Every penny is worth it if it gives my husband one more day of life." Mark nodded, but his expression said the opposite. "I understand the sentiment, but you have to think about the future. Your future, Caroline. When the inevitable happens, you're going to need that money. You can't spend it all on treatments that, let's be honest, are just prolonging the inevitable." I stared at him, unable to process that those words were coming from the mouth of someone who was supposedly part of our family. "How dare you?" I whispered. "How dare you come into my house and tell me to let my husband die to save money?" "I'm not saying that," he responded quickly, holding up his hands. "I'm just being realistic. The doctors already said there's no cure. The treatments are just extending his suffering. Maybe it would be more humane." "Get out of my house," I said, my voice trembling with rage. "Now, Caroline, listen. Get out of my house." He stood up slowly, gathering his papers with calculated movements. "I'm just trying to help. Jessica is worried about you. We both are." "Well, you can tell Jessica that if she's so worried, she can come see me. She can come see her dying father instead of sending her husband to talk about money." Mark left without another word. I shut the door behind him and leaned against the wall, shaking. Not from fear, but from a rage so deep I didn't know how to contain it. Michael called me from the bedroom. "Caroline, are you okay?" I heard voices. I went to him, wiping my tears away quickly, putting on my best smile. "I'm fine, my love. It was just a pushy salesman." He looked at me with those eyes that could still see through any lie. "Caroline, tell me the truth." And I told him. Everything. Mark's visit, the papers, the suggestions to stop treatment to save money. I watched his expression change from confusion to sadness, and finally to something that looked like pain, but not physical. It was a pain of the soul. "They just see numbers," he said finally. "To them, I'm just an expense now, an obstacle between them and the inheritance." "Don't say that. It's the truth, Caroline. And you know it." I couldn't deny it, because it was the truth. And it was the saddest thing we had ever acknowledged in our 43 years together. I called Jessica that night. For the first time in months, I didn't hold back what I was feeling. "Your husband came here today," I said, without preamble. "He came to tell me to stop spending money on your father, to let him die to preserve the inheritance. There was silence on the other end. Then, her voice, carefully neutral. "Mom, Mark is just thinking about your future." "My future? Or his? Or yours?" "It's not like that, Mom. You're misunderstanding." "I'm not misunderstanding anything, Jessica. And let me tell you something very clearly. As long as your father is alive, I will do everything in my power to keep him comfortable. I will spend every last cent if I have to, and when he's gone, if there's anything left, it will be because we decided, not you." "Mom, you're being irrational. You're letting emotions." "I'm his wife. I'm supposed to be emotional. And you? What are you supposed to be feeling, his daughter?" There was no answer. Just breathing on the other end of the line. "When you're ready to come see your father like the daughter you're supposed to be, you'll be welcome. Until then, keep your husband away from my house." I hung up before she could reply. My hands were shaking. My heart was beating so hard I could feel it in my throat. But I also felt something else. Something I hadn't felt in a long time. Power. The feeling of having defended what was right. My mother Eleanor arrived the next day, as she always did, with a bag of pastries and that warm smile that never changed. She sat with me in the kitchen as I told her everything. Mark's visit, my conversation with Jessica, my fears about what was to come. She listened in silence, nodding occasionally, her wrinkled hands holding mine on the table. "Caroline," she said finally, "I've lived 87 years. I've seen a lot. And let me tell you something I've learned. People's true nature is revealed in difficult times, when there's money involved, when there are inheritances, when there's grief. That's when you see who they really are. I feel like I don't know my own daughter," I admitted, the tears falling freely now. "Maybe you never did. Or maybe she changed. Or maybe she was always like this and you just didn't want to see it. It doesn't matter now. What matters is that you know who you are. And I know who you are. You're my daughter. You are a strong, loyal woman who loves deeply. Don't let her make you doubt that." Those words sustained me through the following weeks. Because things got worse. Michael was declining faster. The doctors started talking about palliative care, about making his last days comfortable instead of fighting. It was the conversation I had been dreading, but I finally couldn't ignore it. Michael made the decision for both of us. "Caroline," he said one afternoon, his voice barely a whisper, "I'm tired. So tired. I want to go home. I want to die in our bed, with you by my side. Not in a hospital, not hooked up to machines, just you and me." I cried. I cried like I hadn't cried in months. But I agreed, because it was what he wanted. And after a lifetime of giving me everything, he deserved to choose how he left. We set up a hospital bed in our bedroom. I hired nurses who came twice a day. The doctor visited every third day. But most of the time, it was just Michael and me, as it had always been. I read him his favorite books. We played the music we loved when we were young. I told him stories of our best times, making him smile even when smiling hurt. Jessica came one last time before the end. She arrived on a Sunday, again, alone. She sat by Michael's bed for exactly 15 minutes. She told him she loved him, but the words sounded hollow, practiced. Michael looked at her with those eyes that were already seeing beyond this world. "Jessica," he said, his voice so weak she had to lean in to hear, "take care of your mother. Promise me you'll take care of your mother." She nodded, tears finally falling down her cheeks. "I promise, Dad." It was the last time he spoke to her. It was the last time any of us believed her promises. Michael died on a Tuesday morning, just as the sun was starting to come through our bedroom window. I was lying next to him, holding his hand as I had for the past several weeks. His breathing had become irregular during the night, each inhale a visible effort, each exhale weaker than the last. "Caroline," he whispered sometime in the early morning, his voice barely audible, "you were the best part of my life. The best thing that ever happened to me. Thank you for every day." I couldn't speak. I just squeezed his hand tighter and brought my face close to his. "I love you," I finally managed to say. "I've always loved you." He smiled. That small, tired, but genuine smile that I had fallen in love with 43 years ago. "Me too, my love. Me too." Those were his last words. He fell asleep after that, and his breathing just got slower and slower. I knew what was happening. The nurses had prepared me for this moment. But knowing it's coming doesn't make it hurt any less. At 7:15 in the morning, he just stopped breathing. There was no dramatic struggle, no moment of panic, just one last, soft exhale and silence. The kind of silence that weighs a ton. The kind of silence that tells you something fundamental in the universe has just shifted. I lay there next to him, for I don't know how long, an hour, maybe 2, stroking his hair, memorizing every line on his face, saying goodbye in the only way I could. Finally, I called the nurse. She came, verified what we already knew, and began making the necessary calls. The doctor, the funeral home, papers to sign, procedures to follow. The world kept spinning, even though mine had come to a complete stop. I called Jessica. She answered on the 3rd ring. "Mom? Your father passed away," I said, my voice surprisingly calm. "This morning, peacefully." There was a pause. "I'm on my way," she said finally. I called my mother next. She didn't say anything when I gave her the news. She just cried on the other end of the line. We cried together, for long minutes. "I'm coming, my baby girl," she said finally. "I'm coming." Eleanor arrived first, despite her age and her bad knees. She hugged me at the door, and we both just fell apart. She had loved Michael like a son. She had shared so many moments with us. Her loss was his, too. Jessica arrived 3 hours later. She arrived with Mark, both of them dressed as if they were coming from the office. Formal suits, composed expressions, a coldness that contrasted sharply with the suffocating heat of the grief that filled the house. "I'm so sorry, Mom," Jessica said, giving me a brief, stiff hug. "He was a good man." Was, past tense. As if Michael were already just an archived memory. "Where is he?" she asked, looking around. "In our room," I replied. "The funeral home will be here in a couple of hours." She nodded but didn't move toward the bedroom. She didn't go to see her father one last time. She stayed in the living room, sitting on the sofa, with Mark beside her in that uncomfortable silence that seemed to be their natural state. My mother made coffee. She called a few close neighbors. The house slowly began to fill with people coming to pay their respects, to offer help, to share stories about Michael. The couple next door, who he'd helped fix their water heater for free. The man from the corner store who remembered how Michael always had a joke ready. The lady from the market who cried because Michael had lent her money once when her son was sick and had never asked for it back. Stories. So many stories of kindness, of generosity, of a man who had touched lives without ever expecting anything in return. Jessica listened to it all with that neutral expression that had become her trademark. Mark checked his phone discreetly, as if he were in a boring waiting room. The funeral home arrived, finally. I watched them take Michael's body, covered in a white sheet, on a gurney that crossed our living room, the same space where we had danced on New Year's Eve, where we had put up the Christmas tree every December, where we had celebrated birthdays and anniversaries and all the ordinary moments that build an extraordinary life. "We need to plan the funeral," Jessica said once the funeral home had left. "I can take care of it, if you want." "Mom, I know you're exhausted." Part of me wanted to accept. I was exhausted. So exhausted I could barely stand. But something in her tone stopped me. An efficiency that was too practical. An urgency that didn't seem to come from grief, but from something else. "We'll do it together," I said finally. "Tomorrow. Today I need to be quiet." "Of course," she replied, but I saw the flash of frustration in her eyes. That night, after everyone had left, after my mother finally went back to her apartment promising to return early the next day, I was alone in the house. Alone for the first time in 43 years of marriage. I walked through every room. I touched Michael's things. His toothbrush still in the bathroom. His robe hanging on the back of the door. His shoes lined up perfectly in the closet. His books on the nightstand with bookmarks in pages he would never finish reading. I lay down on our bed, on his side, trying to find any trace of his scent on the sheets, and I cried. I cried until I had no tears left, until my body had nothing more to give. The funeral was 2 days later. A simple but dignified service, just as Michael would have wanted. The church was full. Colleagues from his years in business, neighbors, friends from decades past, people I didn't even know, but who came to pay respects to a man who had been good to them in some way. Jessica and Mark sat in the front row with me and my mother. Jessica cried discreetly, a handkerchief in hand, the perfect picture of a grieving daughter. But I knew her. I knew the difference between real tears and performative tears. These were the latter. The pastor spoke about Michael's life, about his integrity, his hard work, his devotion to his family, about how he had built something from nothing and never lost his humility. People got up to share anecdotes, laughter mixed with the tears. This is how a funeral should be, I thought. A celebration of a life well lived, not just sadness for a life lost. Then came the burial. Watching the casket being lowered into the earth was the hardest part. That was finality. That was the moment there was no going back, that Michael was truly gone and never coming back. My mother held me as I tossed the first rose onto the casket. Jessica tossed the second, her face composed in a perfect mask of appropriate sorrow. Back at the house, the neighbors had prepared food. The house filled up again with people eating and drinking and sharing more stories. It was comforting and exhausting all at the same time. I just wanted everyone to leave. I just wanted to be alone with my grief. But I wasn't going to get that luxury. Because at some point in the afternoon, while I was in the kitchen trying to escape the noise, Jessica approached me. She had that folder in her hands, the same folder Mark had brought months ago. "Mom," she said, her voice low but firm. "We need to talk. Now." "Jessica, not today. Please. We just buried your father." "That's exactly why we need to talk. There are legal matters to resolve. The will, the properties, the bank accounts. It can wait a few days." "No, Mom, it can't. There are deadlines. There are taxes. There are procedures to follow." And that's when I saw it, in her eyes. It wasn't grief. It wasn't sadness. It was urgency, need, greed, barely contained behind a facade of practical concern. "Give me a week," I said, trying to stay calm. 1 week to process this, to rest, to be able to think clearly. She clenched her jaw. 1 week. Then, but after that, we need to act. For your own good, Mom. For everyone's good. She left soon after, with Mark trailing behind her as always. And I stayed in that kitchen, holding a cold cup of coffee, wondering when, exactly, I had lost my daughter. Or if I had ever really had her at all. The week after the funeral passed in a thick fog. The days blurred into one another without any clear distinction. I got up because my body did it out of habit, not because I had any real desire to face the day. The house felt too big, too quiet, too full of absence. My mother came every day, without fail. She made food that I barely touched. She cleaned, even though the house wasn't dirty. She sat with me in silence because she knew I didn't need conversation, just company. Her presence was the only thing tethering me to reality. Jessica called. Every day, always with the same question disguised in different ways. "Have you thought about what we discussed? Are you feeling ready to go over the papers? Have you contacted the lawyer?" Every call was a reminder that for her, the clock was ticking. For me, time had stopped completely. On the 8th day after the funeral, my mother didn't arrive at her usual time. I waited all morning. By noon, I started to worry. I called her apartment several times, but she didn't answer. Finally, her neighbor answered the phone. "Caroline," she said, her voice shaking. "Your mom had a problem. A fall." I already called an ambulance. I got to the hospital before the ambulance did. I waited in the emergency room, my heart pounding so hard I felt it would burst from my chest. When I finally saw her on that gurney, so small, so frail, with dried blood on her temple, I felt the world collapse all over again. She had fallen on the stairs in her building. A broken hip, a mild head trauma. At 87 years old, either of those things was serious. Together, they were potentially fatal. The doctors talked about surgery, about a long recovery, about possible complications at her age. I nodded, not really processing what they were saying. I couldn't lose her. Not now. Not so soon after Michael. I couldn't bear any more loss. "Mom," I whispered next to her bed when they finally let me see her. You have to stay with me. I can't do this alone. Please, don't leave me. She opened her eyes with effort, her hands searching for mine. I'm not going anywhere, baby girl. We Sullivans are hard to kill. But her voice was weak. Too weak. They operated that same afternoon. 3 hours that I spent in the waiting room, pacing, praying to a God I wasn't sure I believed in anymore. I called Jessica to let her know. Her response was, "Wow, that's tough, Mom. Keep me posted. I have a major presentation, but I'll try to get to the hospital when I can." She didn't come. Not that day or the next. My mother's recovery was slow and complicated. Infections, fevers, occasional confusion that the doctors blamed on her age and the trauma. I basically lived at the hospital. I slept in an uncomfortable chair next to her bed. I ate out of vending machines. I forgot to shower until the nurses kindly reminded me there were facilities available for families. In my absence, the house felt even emptier. I'd get home late at night, exhausted, just to change clothes and head back to the hospital at dawn. I didn't check the mail. I didn't answer calls that weren't from the hospital. The outside world ceased to exist. And then, one afternoon, I came home to find Jessica and Mark sitting in my living room. They had a key, of course, the key I had given them years ago for emergencies. But this didn't feel like an emergency. It felt like an invasion. "What are you doing here?" I asked, dropping my purse on the floor. I was too tired to fake politeness. "Mom, we need to talk," Jessica said, standing up. "You've been ignoring my calls for 2 weeks. My mother is in the hospital. I've been busy trying to keep her alive." "I know, and I'm sorry about that. But that doesn't change the fact that there are urgent matters to attend to. Dad's inheritance, this house, your finances." Mark stood up too, and I saw he had that damned folder in his hands again. "Caroline," he said, using my first name as if we had some close relationship. "We understand you're going through a lot. That's why we want to help. We want to ease this burden." "What burden?" I asked, though I knew exactly what he meant. Jessica took a step toward me. "Mom, this house is too much for you, especially now that Dad is gone and Grandma is sick. The expenses, the upkeep, the loneliness. It's not healthy. We've been thinking. The best thing would be to sell it. The market is excellent right now. You could easily get $500,000, maybe more. And then what? Where am I supposed to live?" "With us," she replied quickly. "We have room. We can take care of you. It would be better for everyone." Better for everyone. Those words again. Translation: better for them. "I am not selling my house," I said firmly. "This is my home. I built my life with your father here. We raised you here. I'm not giving it away just because you think it's convenient." Mark intervened, his tone condescending. "Caroline, you have to be reasonable. At your age, living alone in such a large property isn't practical. And with your mother sick, you're going to need help. Help that costs money. Money you could have if you sell this house and divide the inheritance properly." There it was. The real reason. The money. Always the damned money. Jessica pulled papers from the folder. "Mom, we brought everything you need to sign. Documents to put the house up for sale. Papers to access Dad's bank accounts. Forms to divide the investment assets." The lawyer reviewed them all. "They just need your signature." I looked at them. My daughter and her husband. Standing in my living room, the house Michael and I had filled with love and memories, demanding I hand it over, demanding I give them everything we had worked our entire lives for. And something inside me broke. Or maybe it solidified. I'm not sure which. "No," I said simply. "What?" Jessica asked, as if she hadn't heard me correctly. I said no. I'm not signing anything. I'm not selling my house. I'm not dividing any inheritance right now, and I am certainly not moving in with you. "Mom, you're being irrational." "Irrational?" I repeated, my voice rising. "Irrational is wanting to keep my house after I just lost my husband? Irrational is not wanting to sign legal papers while my mother is fighting for her life in a hospital? Irrational is realizing my own daughter only sees me as an obstacle between her and a pile of money?" Jessica's face hardened. "It's not like that, Mom. We are trying to help you." "Then help me. Help me by being with me. Help me by visiting your grandmother in the hospital. Help me by grieving your father with me instead of calculating how much his legacy is worth. That would be real help." Mark tried to intervene. "Caroline, I think your emotions are—" "Don't talk to me about emotions," I cut him off. "You two don't know the first thing about emotions. You only know about numbers, about bank accounts, about property values. But you know what? This is not the time. I will not sign anything now. Maybe never. That is my decision." Jessica looked at me with an expression I had never seen on her. Pure coldness, barely contained resentment. "You're making a mistake, Mom. A very big mistake." "Maybe," I replied. "But it's my mistake to make. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to take a shower and get back to the hospital. You can see yourselves out." They left without another word. I heard the front door close, and I finally let myself collapse onto the sofa. I was trembling, not from fear, but from something else. Adrenaline, maybe? Or release. For the first time in weeks, I felt like myself. Like Caroline Anderson. Not a lost widow, not a manipulated mother, just to me. That night, at the hospital, I told my mother what had happened. She was more lucid than she had been in days. Her eyes were clearer. "Well done, baby girl," she whispered, squeezing my hand. "That's the Sullivan spirit. Don't you let anyone take what's yours. What you and Michael built. He would be proud. But I'm scared, Mom. Scared I'm going to lose her for good. That this will break us permanently." Eleanor looked at me with those wise eyes that had seen 87 years of life. "If it breaks, baby girl, it's because it was never strong enough to begin with. A daughter who only loves you for your money. She isn't really your daughter. She's just a stranger with your last name." She was right. She was always right. My mother passed away 5 days later. Peacefully, without pain, she just slipped away in her sleep. As if she had waited until she was sure I would be all right, that I had found my strength again. And when Jessica arrived at her grandmother's funeral, that folder still in her hands, I knew exactly what I had to do. My mother's funeral was smaller than Michael's, but no less painful. Eleanor had lived a long, full life. She had raised 3 children on her own after being widowed young. She had worked tirelessly to give us an education and values. Her lifelong friends were there, neighbors from the area where she had lived for decades, people who remembered her as a woman of strong character and a generous heart. I was numb. 2 funerals in less than a month. The 2 people who had been my anchors in this world were gone. I felt like a ship adrift in the middle of the ocean, with no compass, no direction, and no safe harbor to return to. Jessica arrived late to the funeral. She and Mark slipped into a back pew after the service had already started. I saw Jessica check her watch discreetly during the pastor's sermon, as if she had somewhere more important to be than her own grandmother's funeral. After the burial, back at my house, I put out coffee and sandwiches for the few family members and friends who came by. My 2 brothers had traveled in from out of state. I didn't see them often, but their presence was a comfort. We shared memories of Mom, we cried together, we held each other up, as a family should. Jessica kept her distance, talking quietly with Mark in a corner of the living room. I could see them, their heads together, making calculations, exchanging significant glances. I knew what they were thinking. With Mom gone, I was completely alone now, more vulnerable, easier to convince. When the last guests left, when my brothers headed to their hotels promising to visit the next day before they flew home, Jessica finally approached. "Mom, we need to talk. We can't put this off any longer." "Jessica, I just buried your grandmother, my mother. Can you really not wait one day?" "It's precisely because we just lost Grandma that we need to talk," she replied, and her twisted logic left me speechless for a moment. "Mom, you're completely alone now. You don't have Dad. You don't have Grandma. You need us. And we want to be there for you, but to do that, we need to get these legal matters settled first." Mark put the folder on the coffee table. That damned folder, which had become a symbol of everything wrong with this relationship. "Caroline," he said, in his most professional tone, "we have been very patient, very understanding, but there are legal deadlines we have to respect. Michael's will needs to be executed. The taxes must be paid. The properties must be transferred. If we keep waiting, there will be penalties, complications, possible audits. Everything he said sounded reasonable on paper. But I knew the truth behind the words. They didn't care about penalties. They cared about the money. The $3 million Michael and I had saved. This house, valued at $500,000. The investments, the bank accounts. Everything that represented a life of sacrifice and work. Fine, I said finally, surprising them both. Let's talk. Jessica smiled. That smile didn't reach her eyes. But it was something. Thank you, Mom. I knew you'd see reason. Mark opened the folder, pulling out documents organized with colored tabs. He had done his homework. Everything was detailed, categorized, ready for my signature. He began to explain. Michael's will was simple. Everything was left in my name, as is traditional in long-term marriages. But under state inheritance laws, Jessica had the right to claim her share as a direct heir. 50% of everything. $1.5 million, plus half the value of the house. I listened in silence as Mark talked about stocks, bonds, savings accounts, investment properties I didn't even know we had. Michael had been smarter with money than I ever knew. He had invested wisely, diversified, built a solid estate. And now, my daughter wanted half, not because she needed it. Jessica and Mark made good money. They lived in a nice apartment, drove new cars, traveled regularly. They didn't need this money to survive. They wanted it because it was legally theirs. Because they could have it. Because it was too tempting a sum to ignore. And the house? I asked finally, my first question in 20 minutes. Jessica leaned forward. The house is more complicated, Mom. Legally, I'm entitled to half its value. But we don't want to kick you out of your home. So, here's the proposal. We sell the house, split the money, and you come live with us. Or, if you prefer your independence, you can use your share to buy a smaller apartment, something more manageable, something appropriate for a woman your age. A woman your age. As if being 69 years old automatically made me incapable of taking care of myself. And what if I don't want to sell? I asked, my voice calm but firm. Mark exchanged a look with Jessica. Then we would have to force the sale legally. Jessica is entitled to her share. If you can't buy out her half of the house, the only option is to sell and split the proceeds. It's the law, Caroline. There it was, the veiled threat behind all the professional courtesy. Sign voluntarily, or we will force you. I looked at the documents spread across the table. So many papers. So many numbers. So many different ways of dividing a life into equal parts, as if love and sacrifice could be quantified in dollars and cents. I need you to explain something, I said finally. Why now? Why the intense urgency? Your father died 3 weeks ago, your grandmother 2 days ago. Why can't you wait? Why are you pushing so hard? Jessica sighed, as if I were a difficult child who couldn't understand simple concepts. We already explained, Mom. There are legal deadlines. There are taxes that… No, I interrupted. I want the truth, not Mark's legal explanation. Your truth, Jessica. Look me in the eye and tell me why you are so desperate for this money. For a moment, I saw something flicker in her face. Shame? Guilt? Whatever it was, it vanished as quickly as it came, replaced by that mask of cold determination that had become her default expression. It's not desperation, Mom. It's practicality. Dad worked his whole life to leave a legacy. That legacy belongs to me just as much as it does to you. I'm not asking for anything that isn't rightfully mine. Your father worked his whole life to make sure I would be taken care of after he was gone, I replied. That was his legacy. Not numbers in a bank account, not properties to be divided, but the peace of mind knowing his wife wouldn't be left destitute. Mark cleared his throat. With all due respect, Caroline, that's very sentimental, but legally irrelevant. The will is clear. The inheritance laws are clear. Jessica has rights that cannot be ignored for sentimentalism. Sentimentalism. That's what he called 43 years of marriage. A life built together. Memories that were worth more than any bank account. I stood up. It was a slow, deliberate movement. I felt every one of my 69 years in my knees, in my back, in my tired heart. But I also felt something else. something that had been dormant for weeks of grief and confusion. Strength. "I want you to leave," I said calmly. "Now." "Mom, don't be ridiculous. We need to settle." "No, Jessica, we don't need to settle anything today. Not tomorrow, not next week. When I am ready, if I am ever ready, we will talk, but it will be on my terms. In my time, not yours." Mark stood up, gathering his papers with sharp, angry movements. "This is a mistake, Caroline. A very big mistake. We are offering to do this the easy way. If you force us to go the legal route—" "Are you threatening me?" I asked, looking him straight in the eye. "In my own house? On the day I buried my mother?" "It's not a threat," Jessica cut in quickly. "It's reality. Mom, please, be reasonable." "I've been reasonable for too long," I replied. "I was reasonable when you didn't come to see your dying father. I was reasonable when you showed up on the day of his funeral with papers to sign. I was reasonable when you ignored your grandmother in the hospital. My reasonableness is used up." Jessica looked at me with an expression I will never forget. It wasn't sadness. It wasn't regret. It was pure calculation, assessing, measuring, deciding her next move. "Fine, Mom," she said finally, her voice ice cold. "If that's how you want to play it, we'll play. But just remember, you chose this. You chose the hard way." They left. The front door shut behind them with a sound that echoed through the empty house. And I stood there, in the middle of my living room, surrounded by photographs of happier times, knowing I had just crossed a point of no return. But for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel like a victim. I felt like a warrior preparing for battle. The morning after I kicked Jessica and Mark out of my house, I woke up with a mental clarity I hadn't felt in months. The grief for Michael and Mom was still there, heavy in my chest, but it no longer paralyzed me. Now, it fueled me. I made coffee, sat down at the kitchen table with a notebook, and started writing. Everything. Every suspicious visit. Every comment about the house being too big. Every push about our finances. Every single moment they chose money over family. I needed to see the entire pattern in front of me. And there it was, in black and white. It wasn't paranoia. It wasn't my imagination. It was a systematic plan that had started long before Michael's death, maybe years before. Jessica and Mark had been waiting, calculating, and positioning themselves for this exact moment. At 9 o'clock in the morning, I called a lawyer. Not the one they had brought, but one my mother's friend had recommended to me years ago. Elias Martin, a man in his 70s. Officially retired, but he still took select cases that mattered to him. I explained everything over the phone. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, there was a long silence. "Mrs. Anderson," he said finally, his voice calm but serious. "What you're describing is, unfortunately, more common than people think. Children who see their elderly parents as financial hurdles instead of family. Let me review the documentation you have. I need to see your husband's original will, the property deeds, and any papers they presented to you." "I have everything right here," I replied. Michael was meticulous with his paperwork. "Good. Come to my office tomorrow. And Mrs. Anderson, one more thing. Do not sign anything. Absolutely nothing. Not even if it seems harmless. Do you understand me?" "I understand perfectly." That afternoon, I did something I had never done. I went to the bank where Michael and I had our main accounts. I spoke with the manager, someone who had known us for 20 years. "I need to make sure no one else can access these accounts," I told him. "No one except me." He nodded sympathetically. "They are already solely in your name, Mrs. Anderson. But I can put extra alerts on the account. Any attempted changes will require your physical presence and multiple forms of identification. Please do that." I also checked the safe deposit boxes. Michael had kept important documents there, jewelry he'd given me over the years, some bearer bonds. Everything was still intact. Everything was still under my control. 2 days later, I met with Elias in his office. It was a small, cozy space, filled with law books and family photos. He offered me tea, and we sat down to review every single document. "His will is ironclad," he said, after an hour of review. "Everything is left to you, as is common in long-term marriages. Now, your daughter does have a legal right to claim an inheritance, yes, but she cannot force the sale of the house you reside in. That is your primary residence. It's protected under the state's homestead exemption. So they can't force me to sell? I asked, feeling an immense sense of relief. Not easily. They can file for a partition of the estate, but as long as this is your primary residence and you can demonstrate you have no means to buy out her share without selling, a judge will likely rule in your favor, especially given your age and recent circumstances. And the rest of the money? The investments? Elias leaned back in his chair. That's more complicated. She has a legal right to half of the assets acquired during the marriage. However, we can delay the process. We can request appraisals, audits, tax reviews. We can make this process take years, if necessary. And honestly, Mrs. Anderson, based on what you've told me about your daughter's behavior, I suspect she doesn't have the patience for a prolonged legal battle. Most of these cases are settled when the aggressive party gets tired or finds the legal cost exceeds the expected gain. It was a strategy, not a solution, but a strategy. In the meantime, Elias said, I recommend you document everything. Every call from your daughter, every visit, every bit of pressure, or every threat. We need to build a case showing financial harassment if things escalate. I left that office feeling something I hadn't felt since before Michael got sick. Control, power over my own life. Jessica called that night. I didn't answer. She left a voicemail. Mom, we need to talk. This is getting out of hand. We don't want to take legal action, but you're forcing us to. Call me. I didn't call her. Mark sent an email the next day. It was long, detailed, and full of legal jargon and veiled threats about the consequences of my refusal to cooperate. I forwarded it to Elias without responding. A week passed. Then 2. My silence was clearly driving them crazy. They were used to pushing and getting results. My resistance was something they had not calculated on. Then the certified letter arrived, from a different law firm, a bigger, more intimidating one. A formal notification that Jessica Anderson was initiating legal proceedings to claim her rightful inheritance. I had 30 days to respond. I called Elias immediately. He didn't seem worried. This is expected, he said. Now we respond. With our own documentation, we file for extensions, we question their valuations. We make them work for every single penny. How much is this going to cost me? I asked, suddenly worried about my own legal fees. My fees are modest, Mrs. Anderson. And believe me, theirs will be much, much higher. Every motion they file, every hearing, every document, it will cost them. Eventually, they will realize this fight is costing them more than it's worth. That night, for the first time since Michael's death, I slept soundly. Not because the problem was solved, but because I was finally facing it instead of running from it. My brothers called to check in. I told them everything. They offered to fly out, to support me, to testify about Jessica's behavior if needed. We were a small family, but when it mattered, we had each other. 2 elderly neighbors, friends of Michael's, came to visit. They had noticed Jessica wasn't coming around anymore. When I vaguely explained the situation, they offered their own stories. Sons who had tried to take their houses. Relatives who disappeared once the money ran out. I wasn't alone in this. It was a sadly common pattern. A month after the certified letter, we had our first hearing. It was brief, procedural, but I saw them there. Jessica and Mark with their lawyer, a young man in an expensive suit with a shark-like smile. Elias, in his modest but immaculate suit, stood his ground. We filed motions to extend the appraisal process. We questioned the valuation of the house they had submitted. We requested audits of all investments. Every point, every procedure was designed to delay and to complicate. I saw the frustration on Jessica's face when the judge approved our requests. This was going to take much longer than she had anticipated, and cost much more money. When we left the courthouse, she tried to approach me. Mom, this is ridiculous. We can settle this without. I have nothing to discuss with you outside of legal proceedings, I replied, my voice firm. All communication must go through my lawyer. Her face transformed. The mask of the concerned daughter finally fell away completely. What was left was pure, unadulterated rage. You are going to regret this, Mom. You're going to end up alone, with nothing. And then you'll see that you should have just accepted our help." I looked her in the eye. This woman who had been my baby, my little girl, my daughter, and I saw nothing familiar in her. "I'm already alone, Jessica," I replied calmly. "But I prefer to be alone with dignity than to be accompanied by people who only see me as an income source. Your father and your grandmother taught me that." I walked away without looking back, and for the first time in this whole nightmare, I felt something almost like peace. 3 years have passed since that day in the courthouse. 3 years that have completely changed my life, though not in the way Jessica and Mark expected. The legal process dragged out, exactly as Elias predicted. Hearing after hearing, document after document. Appraisals, counter-appraisals, appeals. Every month that passed, their legal costs mounted while mine remained manageable, thanks to Elias's modest fees. After a year and a half, their lawyer quit. Apparently, Mark and Jessica had stopped paying him on time. The new lawyer they hired was less aggressive, more realistic about their chances. Finally, 6 months ago, we reached a settlement. It wasn't what they originally wanted, but it was fair. Jessica received her share of the liquid investments, about $800,000 after taxes and her own massive legal fees, far less than the $1.5 million they had expected, but more than they deserved, considering how they had acted. The house remained with me. Completely. That was non-negotiable, and in the end, they had to accept it. My lawyer successfully argued it was my primary residence, my only source of stability after losing my husband and my mother. The judge agreed. When we signed the final papers, Jessica didn't even look at me. Neither did Mark. They simply took their check and left. There were no goodbyes, no attempts at reconciliation, just silence. And surprisingly, that silence didn't hurt as much as I thought it would. Because in these 3 years, while I was fighting to keep what Michael and I built, I also built something new, a life that was completely and totally mine. I sold some of the investments that remained in my name and used the money to travel. I went to Italy, something Michael and I had always planned but never did. I walked the streets of Rome, imagining how he would have reacted to the Colosseum, to the Trevi Fountain. I carried his memory with me, not as a burden, but as a companion. I took painting classes at the community center. I discovered I have a talent for landscapes. My house is now filled with my own artwork instead of just photographs of the past. I joined a book club made up of other women my age. We meet every 2 weeks. We drink wine, we argue about books, and we share our lives. Some are widows, like me. Others are divorced. All of us understand what it means to rebuild yourself after losing something fundamental. My house, that house Jessica was so desperate for me to sell, became a refuge, not just for me but for others. I turned one of the spare bedrooms into a proper guest room for when my brothers visit, which they do more often now. I use the other one as my art studio. The garden Michael planted, I maintain with care, adding new flowers every season. I donated a significant part of the money I had left to organizations that help seniors with legal aid, people in situations just like mine, with children or relatives trying to take advantage of them. If my experience can help others defend themselves, then something good came from all this pain. Jessica never contacted me again. I heard through the grapevine that she and Mark used the inheritance money as a down payment on a bigger house. A house that is, apparently, costing them more than they can afford. Financial problems. Tension in the marriage. Regret, maybe. Though I'll never know for sure. A part of me, a very small part, still feels something for her. It's not love, exactly, not like the love I felt when she was my baby. It's more like nostalgia for something that never really existed. The daughter I thought I had versus the person she truly is. But most of me is at peace. I learned that true love isn't about shared blood or common last names. It's about actions, about showing up, about choosing someone, over and over. Especially when it's hard. Michael chose me every day for 43 years. My mother Eleanor chose me until her last breath. My brothers choose me now, calling every week, visiting when they can. My new friends choose me, including me in their lives, sharing their stories. And I chose myself. I chose my dignity over the convenience of caving in. I chose my peace of mind over maintaining a toxic relationship. I chose to honor Michael's memory by fighting for what we built together instead of giving it away out of fear. Now, at 72 years old, I feel stronger than I ever have. There's more gray in my hair and more wrinkles on my face than there were 3 years ago. But there's something else in my eyes, too. Something that wasn't there before this whole ordeal. Strength, wisdom, self-reliance. Sometimes, when I'm alone in my house in the afternoons, I sit on the same sofa where this all began, where Jessica showed up with that folder on the day of Michael's funeral, and I smile, because she thought being alone meant I was weak. She thought losing Michael and my mom would leave me vulnerable, easy to manipulate. But she was wrong. Being alone made me stronger. It forced me to stand up for what mattered. It taught me that I can rely on myself, even when no one else is there. I don't need Jessica. I don't need her conditional version of love that only exists when it's convenient. I don't need family that sees me as a means to an end. I have this house filled with beautiful memories. I have the satisfaction of knowing I honored Michael's legacy. I have true friendships built on mutual respect. I have my paintings, my travels, my books, my garden. I have my dignity intact. And that, I've discovered, is worth more than any amount of money. It's worth more than maintaining false relationships. It's worth more than the approval of a daughter who never really knew me or loved me in the way a daughter should love her mother. If Jessica showed up at my door tomorrow, full of regret and looking for reconciliation, I honestly don't know what I would do. Part of me wants to believe that forgiveness is possible, but another part, the part that learned the hard lessons of these past few years, knows that some things can't be fixed. Some betrayals run too deep. Maybe someday she'll understand what she lost. Not the money she was expecting to inherit in full, but the relationship with her mother. The last years we could have shared, the memories we could have made, or maybe she never will. And that's okay too, because my happiness no longer depends on her. My peace no longer requires her approval. My life is mine, completely mine, for the first time in decades. Michael would be proud, I think. He was always a fighter. He always stood up for what was right, even when it was hard. He taught me that by his example, all our years together. Mom would be proud too. She raised me to be strong, independent, to not let anyone walk all over me. Her lessons finally resonated when I needed them most. So here I am, Caroline Anderson, 72 years old. A widow, a mother to a daughter I lost, even though she's still alive. But also, an artist, a traveler, a friend, a survivor, and I am fine. Better than fine. I am whole. This is my story, my truth, my quiet victory over those who thought my age and my grief made me vulnerable. They were wrong. And every day I wake up in this house, in this life that I defended with everything I had, is a reminder that I did the right thing, that I chose to love myself when no one else would. And that, in the end, is the most important lesson of all.